concerned with that. Back in the early 1900s, there were a lot of fraternal organizations in existence. Today we have the Elks Club, the Moose Club, the Lions Club, the Eastern Star, you name it, there's some out here, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of the larger and more Shriners, yep. So there's a lot of organizations. But believe it or not, in the early 1900s, there were a lot more. One such group out in the Midwest met like we're meeting and said, based on that knowledge, roughly 1/4 of our income going towards the cost of a funeral, we can't afford that. So what they started doing was they started putting money in the center of the table. And they said, if your family, as a member of our organization or our church, we're going to help you out. We're going to pull that money from the center, and we're going to take care of the funeral costs. Well, it was such a good thing. It grew so fast that this one fraternal organization couldn't handle it all. So they merged with an insurance company. Then other organizations saw it, caught wind of it, thought it was a great idea, and they either merged with insurance companies to do the same thing, or they formed their own insurance company. Today we still have options like that, and in the second step of the advanced funeral planning, I'll explain that process so that you have it. So that's a little bit of the history on advanced funeral planning. I said, I've researched it, and it does actually go all the way back into biblical time. But for our programs and keeping them kind of concise to the point, maybe 30 minutes or so, I can't go that far back. But it was quite interesting looking at some of that information that was posted out there. But that's the history of the advanced funeral planning. Why is this so important to me? It was probably 25, 26 years ago. I'm not sure. I've lost track of the time now. My oldest cousin, who is my father's and my mother's age, he picked up the phone and called me one night and said, I want you to come out to the house. We want to get our funeral plans taken care of. Our son, their son, my cousin, was killed in an automobile accident probably 2 years prior to that, and they did not want their 2 adult daughters left to make these decisions. So I went out to the house, and what they were about to tell me was brand new to me. Tonight you're going to think it's crazy because it's not so new anymore. But what they told me was they wanted to be cremated. That wasn't talked about so much back then, and especially in my family. It just isn't. But that's what they wanted. So I went ahead and took care of the arrangements, left there feeling good about it because they relieved the burden from their daughters. They don't have to guess what mom or dad wanted, and especially they don't have to pay for it. It's all taken care of. So I guess about 10 years went by, and my cousin's wife was diagnosed with cancer, and she suffered for about a year. At home, fortunately. She was at home. Her daughters were able to be there with her. One of the downsides, if you will, I guess, to it was that they saw that deterioration taking place. When she passed away, we had prearranged a cremation only. Big difference. Most people aren't aware that there are options when it comes to cremation now. Back then there really wasn't. We weren't trained to offer much more than that. So the nice thing was they prearranged. They can make some changes. The one change that they made, which only made sense, and I should have known about it, so I take a little bit of blame with this, my cousin's wife was our church organist. And we were talking before everyone got here. The church that I grew up in was mostly my family, and probably about 125 people. So they had to have, or they wanted to have, a church service. So they have this church service. Cremation took place. They have a church service. And at the end of the service, I see my 2 adult cousins, one my age, one a little bit older, in the corner, very, very upset out in the parking lot. And I approached just to offer my condolences, whatever, anything I could do. And it's what they told me as to why this program is here today. They told me, they said, we wished we could have seen our mom one last time the way she looked before she got sick. We could have done that. But we didn't have that offering back when we did the prearrangements. And you have roughly 72 hours from the time of death till a funeral takes place. Not everybody's thinking straight. I was not involved in the final arrangements, so they got the service that they had prearranged. They got everything they wanted. I left there feeling guilty because I really should have probably gone back to them and said, hey, things have changed. Here are options. We can do this, 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 or this. What do you want? They may not have done anything different, but I didn't offer it. So leaving there, I decided, what can I do about it? I don't want to feel guilty again. This program is a result of that. I figured if I could talk to one family a month, I was at least doing something about it. And as you can see, more and more people keep rolling in today. I mean, we have another one. We have 60-some people here later this month we'll be talking to. So my goal of talking to people certainly is working out. So that's why the program exists. The two-step process. The first step is making the decision to come out and get the information. That is the hardest decision. People are not walking up to the funeral home door, pounding on it every day, saying, we want to get our information. It happens, but it doesn't happen frequently. Along with step number one is biographical information. And this one gets quite interesting because at the time of death, there are approximately, possibly, 125 decisions or questions that need to be answered. There is a brochure in your booklet that we provided that will share with you each of those 125 things. Now remember, when a death occurs, you have roughly 72 hours to plan this funeral and make it all happen. There's certainly some leniency there. I mean, you can work around with it, but most funerals occur within 72 hours. I challenge anyone, and I'm sure there's some out there that will go and get married in less than 72 hours, but usually not. Most times it's planned for well over a year or maybe up to a year to make everything right. And when we're celebrating the life of an individual, it doesn't quite seem fair that we're only given 72 hours to make all the decisions. One such question that you'll see in there that is probably the most important question for this program is, and it's kind of a crazy one, you'd think we'd all know it, but if I went around the room right now and asked every single one of you, what is your mother's maiden name? You can probably give it to me. If I go around the room and I ask your spouse or anybody with you, what is your mother's maiden name? It becomes more difficult. We need to know that. On the death certificate, it is a requirement. It's not a funeral home requirement, but on the death certificate, the state and the government wants to know what that is. We always share a story that I almost feel like I'm embarrassing sharing with this, but it is so common, and yet it doesn't seem like it would be. She was actually taking care of her mother-in-law passed away back in March, and she had already taken care of a lot of the paperwork. But one thing that she didn't have on there was her mother-in-law's mother's maiden name. So she calls her husband to ask him what the name was, and his response was grandmother. And she asked again, I need a name, not grandmother. And he said, I don't know what it is. Never knew. We were somewhere else. Was that today earlier that someone said the same thing? And you said something similar to that. I heard it while my family was on vacation down in Myrtle Beach, that a young granddaughter had no idea what her grandfather's name was. So it's more common than what we think, and yet we have to have it. I share the story of back in 2017, within a 1-month period, I lost my father and I lost my stepfather. And one of the other questions that's listed in there is what is the highest grade of education completed? Again, not a funeral home requirement. It's a state requirement. It's on the death certificate. What's the highest grade of education completed? I had no idea what my father or my stepfather's highest grade was. So fortunately, my mother knew all that. I still don't know, and I don't need to know any longer, but now out of curiosity, every time I do this program, I keep thinking, what was their highest grade of education? These are two of the questions that you're going to find in there that you have to have. The one that I think is the most important is for veterans. If anyone in here is a veteran, or if you know anyone that's a veteran, you really want to make certain that you get a copy of the honorable discharge paper, the DD-214. Keep that readily available. In fact, I encourage you to take it down to the funeral home and put it on file, because when a death occurs, there are benefits that the federal government will provide for the deceased and for the surviving family. Some of those benefits would include if you're willing to be interred into one of the national cemeteries, which we have Indiantown Gap to the north, and I don't even know what it is down south here. There's one, well, Arlington, we have Arlington, and I think there's one in West Virginia for sure. But in order to get in there, you have to have a copy of the honorable discharge paper. The spouse of the veteran is also entitled to a free grave space, opening and closing, the outer burial vault container, their name on the monument, death certificates. There's a lot involved there, and it can save a family a lot of money if you're willing to go that route. If you want to be buried in a local cemetery, there are still benefits, but then it is limited to just the honorably discharged veteran. Those are things that if you or anyone you know served, get a copy of that down to the funeral home if you can, because it's just so easy to come, have it right there. They can pull it out of the file versus having to look for it. Now, we heard today from a gentleman that attended that if you don't have it, or the best thing you can do is go down to your local courthouse and register somehow. Register with them that you have this honorable discharge. They'll actually even give you copies. He said he's done quite a few of them. They're free, and then it's down there if you need it as well. But the best thing is just get it to the funeral home and you'll be good. So that's just 3 of the items that are in the 125 things. Step number 1, biographical information, very important. We have to have social security numbers and proper spellings of names and stuff like that. The other part of step number 1 is what type of a funeral service is it that you want? I used to leave it at that. For the longest time, I left it at that. And then one day, I woke up and I realized I'm doing it wrong. I'm going against the very reason that I put this together. That's what I did for my cousins. I did what they wanted. We didn't do what their family needed. So I'll rephrase it. What type of a funeral service is it that you want? But more importantly, what type of a celebration of life is it that your loved ones, friends are going to need? So with that being said, will it be a traditional funeral with a viewing? Will that take place right here at the church, or will it be at a funeral home, or will it be somewhere else? If it's going to be a traditional funeral, there are a few things that you would take into consideration, and I recommend that if you do it in an advanced setting, come down to the funeral home, because there you can actually see the variety of caskets that you can choose from. They're not all super expensive. They have them ranging in price. All different colors, made of steel, made of wood. There's a lot of options with that. Kind of the same way with the outer burial vault containers. An outer burial vault container is not required by the funeral home. It's not even required by the state. Each cemetery regulates whether or not you have to have an outer burial vault container. That can range from a simple concrete grave liner all the way up into the more fancy burial vaults. So again, if you come down to the funeral home, you actually can visually see what those things are. What type of music would you want played at your funeral service? You know, a lot of people don't think about that. That was my biggest challenge with my aunt and uncle. My aunt and uncle only had a child who died at birth, so they pretty well became kind of like my grandparents, because my grandparents passed away before I was born. It took me 9 years. This is how great of a salesperson I am. It took me 9 years to get them to decide to go and do their prearrangements. And it was the best thing that could have ever happened, because when my uncle passed away, I traveled up and down the East Coast. Fortunately, that particular time, I was just in Scranton, Pennsylvania, not too far away. The best part was everything was taken care of. All I needed to do the next day when I got home was take the clothing that he would be wearing to the funeral director and then just review the obituary. Very simple, taken care of. And there was a case with 125 things. Had that not been done, had my aunt passed away, one of the questions would have been, what was his mother's maiden name? I have no idea. Never met her. She was gone long before I was ever even born. But because they did their prearrangements, it was taken care of. The most interesting thing about that is that, boy, if I would have had to make the decisions on things, my aunt would not have gotten that most beautiful gunmetal gray casket she got, because I would have given her a more feminine white or pink casket. Had she not given me the clothing that she wanted to wear, I would have bought her brand new. These people never really had brand new clothing. They went yard sailing. They made their own stuff. They just didn't do much in the way of new things. So I learned a pretty valuable lesson when that happened, that they gave me a really nice gift. And when I think more about it, it's like at the time of death, if they wouldn't have had that paid for, I would have had to take care of that. It's a big expense. Could have been done, but it could have been challenging as well. So step number 1, biographical information. Along with that, what type of a funeral service? If you want to have it here at the church, we can absolutely do it here at the church. If you want to have it at the funeral home, we can do it there. You have a pastor here who would most likely speak, but some people don't. So your friends outside of here, there are options for that. And the music, again, while I grew up with all traditional hymns, we're seeing more and more people that are going and just having classical music played, or for the younger generations, they may have rock music played. I mean, there's just a lot of options that you can go with. I heard a gentleman today talking about the fact that when his brother-in-law passed away, he wanted it to be a celebration. He wanted it to be a beach-themed celebration, and that's exactly what it was. And he said, you know what, it was really nice. It was fitting. So there's a lot of options when it comes to a funeral. The one that I like to talk a little bit more about, and not because it's one that's less known, and that is the cremation side of things. With cremation, there is more to it today than death occurs and a cremation takes place. You can actually have a viewing without an embalming, but there are some requirements with that. That must be family, private viewing only. If you want to have a public viewing, then you must be cremated, or you must be embalmed for that. When my stepfather passed away, he wanted to be cremated. And again, that salesman, that great salesman that I am, I probably talked to him 20-some years ago. They never did anything. And one Sunday evening, I walked into the house, and the very first words out of my stepfather's mouth was, I want to be cremated. That was great, because it was the opportunity for me to talk about it again, because it's the one thing that you won't hear about. Unless you come to another one of my programs, I'm not talking to you about it again, or unless you ask me, because I don't push. It's not me, never has been, and never will be. Before I could even say a word, my mother said, not happening. If I'm still alive, you're not getting cremated. So I'm still picking myself up off the floor because he's saying this, and now it gives me an opportunity to talk, and she saved me because she said, it's not happening. Once everything kind of came around, then I was able to talk. And what I was able to tell him is that If those are your wishes, get your prearrangements done. And here's why. There's 6 of us. And at the time, the laws here in the state of Pennsylvania said that if something would have happened to my mother first, then the funeral director would have gone to each one of us and said, what kind of a funeral service do you want? What do you want? And what do you want? All my other siblings, I think, would have said full service traditional funeral. And when it came to me, which I would have been number 5 of 6, I'm thinking I probably would have been with him because I would have had to say he wanted cremation. And I don't think my siblings would have liked that. And at the time, there had to be unanimous consent. Now it has changed. The law says that the majority rules. So if there's no prearrangement and there's no surviving spouse, the children or the next of kin are the decision makers. And in our case, the majority would have had to say, yeah, he can be cremated. Otherwise, it would have had to go to court for them to make a decision. So I always tell everyone, if cremation is in your thoughts, I would absolutely get a prearrangement taken care of, because it gives the funeral home, the funeral director themselves, a little more ammunition to be able to say to the family, here's the situation. Dad or mom wanted this. And then, if that's not good enough, then they can pull a prearrangement out and say, here's everything documented. And if that's not enough, then they can say, and by the way, it's paid for. Usually by that point, the family's saying, okay, that's good enough. But not always. And it's getting crazier. In my 32 years, I remember being able to take people that their biggest concern was, how are we paying for this funeral? And we could literally walk them down to the bank and get them a loan, and everything was fine. Today, the biggest challenge that we're running into is that separating families into different rooms and going back and forth to try and come up with a peaceful celebration. It's getting much more difficult every day. It's so sad to see, and it's really difficult to be in the middle of that. So by doing the advanced funeral planning, it can alleviate a lot of it. Probably not all of it, but a lot of it. So what type of a service is it that you want? More importantly, what is it that your family is going to need? If it's on that cremation side, you can have a viewing. My stepfather wanted to be cremated. My mother ultimately gave in at the time of death. She said, okay, we'll cremate, but we're going to make a couple adjustments to it. And one of them was my request. I needed to see him one more time. I was just like my cousins. I did not want to see him the way he was in the hospice center, the night before. I just didn't want to remember that. So I was able to go into the funeral home, and they had him presented very nicely, and that's the memory I have now. My mom's requirement was he had a funeral service. So we had the viewing, the private family viewing, nobody else, 20 minutes, sent him to be cremated, brought him back, and then we had a full funeral service with their pastor involved. My mother needed that, as did most of us. And the best part is, I can almost stand here and guarantee you, almost, he would have been happy. He was in the military. He had a DD-214. We had an honor guard there. While he wasn't the type person that would really want that, again, it was for us. We needed it, and he deserved that. Yes? The burial at sea is an option for in full, with whole body present, or with cremated remains. With cremation, you have other options. A lot of people will want to, if there's multiple people. In fact, I just did it a couple months ago. A lady that I knew, her husband passed away, and she had gotten lockets for each one of the children and grandchildren. So we actually put some of the cremated remains in each one of those lockets, and I took care of that for them. You have scattering. You can scatter the cremated remains. You can take them home and put them on the mantle. It's the one that I always caution, though, to this, and that is, that's okay if you're willing to take them home and put them on your mantle, but what happens with the next generation? We've had situations where people have gone to auction houses and found urns at auctions. Some will end up in the trash. My recommendation is, if somebody is insistent on cremation, that you have a final resting place. And when people tell me that folks don't go out to cemeteries and visit, I challenge them, go sit in a cemetery for a day. And I assure you, there are people going in there regularly. I spent a day, I have a cemetery monument business, and I was with my guys digging the foundations up in Carlisle a couple summers ago. A really small cemetery. We were there most of the day because I think we had 6 or so to do. And I am not kidding you. I counted at least 25 cars that came in that day to pay their respects. And it was, none of them was from a funeral. It was, they were coming in there to pay their respects. And I've seen that out in the middle of remote northeastern PA. People will come in, and when I'm trying to get my foundation dug, that's hard because you're making noise and you want to respect them. So they do come out. So if you can get that final resting place, it's a real good idea. So a lot of options with that. Those are things that, if you wanted, you could talk to Sharon about. So step number 1 is pretty much that simple. It's a matter of what is it that you want, what is it that your family's going to need, and then choosing the merchandise, the services, the songs, the scripture that you'll want to have read. When my aunt passed away, those were the 2 things that, believe it or not, they didn't do in their prearrangements. They did not select hymns, and they didn't select scripture. I was saying before most of you arrived here, we've had 2 pastors in my 54 years. And the most recent pastor's only been there about 12 years. So the pastor prior to that actually knew my aunt extremely well, and so did the new pastor. So it was not a problem for me. I just let them do what they were going to do. I actually got up and spoke, and they were right there at my side, which I needed at that point. Normally I don't have a problem talking, but that day was a little bit more difficult. At that time, when she passed away, we knew she was going to pass away. We were at home with her, and the day that she did, all I had to do was pick up the phone, call the funeral home. They came out, and then I went in for about 15 minutes. Because of having those prearrangements done, all I had to do was go in and finalize the day, time, place, the little things. So it was real easy for me to get out of there and get back home to my family, where I really, really wanted to be, because that was one of the most difficult days for me. So a lot of good reasons for it, but that is step number 1. It's really not too difficult. The nice thing about what Sharon offers is that you can actually come down to the funeral home, schedule a time, come down, take a look, and you can get an idea. No obligation. You can just come down and see what's available and talk to her and get questions answered. On step number 2, that's on the financial side of things. For those that would want to take care of it, there are a number of ways to do that. And when you open up and take these books home with you, you're going to see a funny chart in there that you probably won't have any idea what it is or what we're talking about, but it's called Rate Your Plan. And what you'll see in that chart, or on that chart, is down the left-hand column, potential implications to using the items going across the top to pay for a funeral. Some of those things going across the top, the very first one is the funeral home plan, and we'll talk about that as we go on. But some of the other ones are going to be using an IRA, a 401k, savings, using a life insurance policy. When my stepfather passed away, he actually had a small loan on an automobile. We didn't know about it. My mom didn't know about it. and we're still not sure why he had it, but he did. No big deal. We figured we would simply just transfer the automobile over into my mom's name, but when we found out there was a loan, it doesn't work that way. She actually was required to either pay it off or she was going to have to refinance it. At 79 years old, not something that you really want to go in and do. Now, fortunately, she had the means to pay it off. Otherwise, she would have had a little bit of an issue there. The other nice thing was that she had the means to pay for the funeral because she was waiting for life insurance to be paid out, which took quite a few weeks. Most funeral homes today, I saw one yesterday I was in, they required payment by the day of arrangements. A lot of firms they want payment by the day of the funeral service. So, how would you pay? I was at a training program years ago, and I was asked a series of questions, and it was really eye-opening. The person putting the program on said, if something happened to you today, who's going to be at the funeral home tomorrow making your arrangements? It's a real eye-opener. If you don't think about it, because we don't think about it, it's not a big deal. But she put me in a real position, in a real spot. It was a whole group of us. And I started thinking about it. It's like, well, my wife's going to be there. She's pretty emotional. All I could envision was, that's not going to be good. Who else is going to be there with her? Now, this is a little bit more comforting because you start thinking, well, I would envision my mother, and at the time my stepfather would have been there. I think her mother would have been there. Our son, if he could get home from Miami in time, because he lives in Miami, I think he probably would be there. Our pastor would be there. Maybe some other family members. The next question was the one. Who's going to make the decision? Now, you'd think it's real simple. It's my wife. Maybe my son. That's not, most times, the total truth of the matter. A lot of times, every one of those people in that room are influential in that decision-making process. This is where emotional overspending takes place. I had years ago, I was working with a family, husband and wife, both suffering from cancer at the exact same time. Our church was basically helping them get through. Money was not there. Insurance was not there. Neither one of them had work. It was a challenge. About 2 weeks before his death, she called me up and she said, what am I going to do about a funeral? So I went to work, and I actually was able to get them a very respectable funeral package put together that would have been under $5,000. And I worked out details on how we would get that paid off, mostly through family and the church. I told them we need to get it down in paper. We need to get this started because I'm leaving for Florida. And I would really hate for something to happen while I'm gone. They didn't do it. Didn't do it. I'm no sooner landing in Florida and my phone's blowing up. Family's calling me, he passed away. The funeral home's calling me, he passed away. What do we do? I said, stick with my game plans. I wrote it down. Stick with my game plans. You'll have an affordable funeral and it'll be paid for. I make my way back home, and when I get home, the funeral home owner said, do you have any idea how we're getting paid for this funeral? I said, exactly. I do. It's in the plans. That less than $5,000 is going to be paid, and you'll see it right there. And they said, no. It's not $5,000. It's over $11,000. Yeah. That was my exact response. I'm not kidding you. That was my exact response, and I had 20-some years experience with this, and my next words out of my mouth were wrong. They were wrong to this day. I caught it, but they were wrong. I said, what did you do? What did you sell them? It wasn't them. They explained it to me. Every one of the people in that room, the children brought their spouses, so there were 6 people right off the bat. The parents of the spouse were there. There was a whole room full of people. And when they found out that the casket wasn't quite good enough, that it was more of a minimal casket, that wasn't good enough. When they found out that it was going to be an evening funeral service at the funeral home, not in the church, which that one I'll give them, but it wasn't good enough. Everything just seemed to be not good enough. And that funeral ended up being over $11,000. Emotional overspending. I always, getting back to the questions that I was posed with was, so, you have my wife, family, everybody in there, and when it comes time to making those decisions, who's it going to be? Well, it's going to be my wife, but all that influence is going to be there. Unfortunately, I think mine would have gone in the opposite direction. I think that my wife would have wanted to do the very best for me, my mom, her mom, but my stepfather would have said, no, you need this one over here, this cheap casket that's the least expensive one, which I'd be okay with that, but I honestly, I could see that happening. And while that's okay, it adds some stress to the family. So as you can see, by getting the arrangements taken care of ahead of time, it eliminates all that. There is no emotional overspending unless for some reason somebody changes their mind. This is what you want, and as long as it's what the family needs, you're good. So how will you pay for the funeral? That was the next question that was posed of me at this training program. Well, easy. I have my pre-arrangements done. Not a problem. My wife goes into the funeral home. She says, here's the pre-arrangement, and it's paid for. What if I didn't have it taken care of? Now how's it going to be paid? That becomes a challenge. Do I have $10,000 in account that she can get to easily? Nope. Do I have $10,000 that she can get to on a Saturday morning? Nope. Not so easy. What if it's on a holiday? Probably not. So what are the other options? Do we utilize the IRA or 401k? Again, if it's on a weekend or a holiday, you're probably not getting to it. And then if you do, does it then become a taxable situation? What if that money is needed to take care of ongoing expenses? What if my mother wouldn't have had the money to take care of buying the car and continuing to keep her house going? She may have been stuck. Life insurance. This is the big one. This is the one that a lot of people are very unaware of for a number of reasons. Life insurance may or may not work for you. And what I mean by that is that life insurance policies, you really have to look at them and see exactly what you have. I was called into a funeral home up in north central Pennsylvania a while back, and the funeral director said, I need help. I've got 5 life insurance policies here, and I need to know exactly what they are, what they're worth, and everything else. That was part of what I do. I get there, and I find out 3 of the 5 policies are accidental death policies. The lady did not die accidentally, so those aren't worth anything. They had at the time probably a $7,500 funeral, I'm thinking is what it was, and they really thought they had enough money there to pay for all of it, and they didn't. They had about $2,500. So the family had to come up with the rest of it. A lot of times we don't know what that policy is. There are policies out there that are written to expire at 65, 75, 85, 90. All policies expire at age 100. Most people don't know that. We had a lady today at the program, her father is 98 years old. And I asked him, what's going to happen there? It's all okay. We know. We've got it all taken care of. I'm like, okay, it's fine. But in 2 years, that policy's going to go away. A number of years ago, we had a gentleman that came in to the program, and he listened to what I said. That was kind of surprising, but he showed up at the funeral, and he said, here's my policy. I've got $10,000 I want to take care of my funeral. And the funeral director looked at him and said, that's great. He said, but in 6 months, it's no longer valid. We have a way to protect you on that. There's a little known IRS code out there that is code number 1035. It allows us to take the cash value of that life insurance policy. We can take it and we can roll it into the funeral home plan. The very first package there protects it. We make it irrevocable. So at age 100, it doesn't exist anymore. You have this program, and that does not expire ever until you need it. The other nice thing is that it rolls non-taxable into the program and made irrevocable. They cannot count it as an asset. So anyone going into a nursing home, if you're on Medicare, you get 100 days. The first 100 days are covered by Medicare. At the end of that 100 days, you become a self-payer. My father was fast approaching that 100 days. We got him out of the nursing home. We got him into assisted living. The difference was $9,300 a month in the nursing home with two other gentlemen in the room with him versus about $4,000 a month in assisted living. He was able to stay in the assisted living for quite a while, but eventually he ran out of money. At that point, we applied for medical assistance. And when you apply for medical assistance, they look at your house, they look at your cash assets, and they look at your life insurance policies. When they do that, if there's any cash value in there, they will require you to cash surrender that and utilize that for the care. So for folks who are considering utilizing a life insurance policy for the funeral, I really highly recommend that you have those, bring them in, have Sharon take a look at them, and review those, because as we talked about at the last program, some clergy or some of the churches will buy policies for some of the staff, not all of them, but some of them. Those typically don't have to be anything done with them because you don't physically own them. Same way with government policies. There are some out there that you won't own, so it's not an issue. And then some teachers' unions have that. And then there are cases where, for the younger folks that have kids, we really don't want to do anything because you bought that for mortgage, you bought it for raising the children, paying the bills, and everything else. So there's certain circumstances where, we just say just keep it the way it is right now, and if we have to do something later, we certainly would. But a lot of people will ultimately lose everything they paid into over the years. We have a way of protecting that. So if that is a thought, I would recommend scheduling an appointment to sit down and discuss it. And you will get a fair and honest opinion of what's best for you. The program itself that the funeral home offers is the best way to take care of funeral arrangements because it's just the safest way. In the state of Pennsylvania, they allow for funeral homes to take your money and do a couple different things with it. One is to utilize an insurance-based product that we have. The other is to use a trust-based product. The trust-based product, while it's okay, if it gets into the wrong hands, it can be a real mess. About 7 or 8 years ago over in Lancaster County, a gentleman was doing both. He was taking your money and he'd either put it into the trust or he'd put it into the insurance-based product. It was okay until it wasn't okay. Everyone that the money went into the insurance-based product were okay. Those who went into the trust-based product were not okay when he was caught stealing the money. There's no bonding for a trust-based product. So when he took the money and ran with it, those folks were out. The insurance-based product, the only way they get paid is at the time of service. So if you sat with Sharon, you did your pre-arrangements today, and 2 months from now you say, I can't take this heat anymore, I'm moving to Alaska. You take your program, you go to Alaska and say, here's my funeral plan. You're taken care of because it doesn't belong to Geisel Funeral Home. It belongs to you, and the only way it ever gets paid out is upon a service. And that can be any funeral home. Fully 100% transferable. For those who want to make a single lump sum payment. You go in, you meet with Sharon, you determine here's exactly the funeral I want. She gives you a price. For those that want to write a check out, you don't write a check out to Geisel Funeral Home, and you definitely don't write it to Sharon. You write it to the insurance company. Your funeral's taken care of. You don't ever have to worry about it again. There's a price freeze. It locks the prices in at today's cost. Now, the one word of caution I have with this is that, and we've been really focusing a lot more on this, is the funeral homes over the years have done families really well with taking care of the full expense. If we go back to the beginning of this program, I asked everybody what the average funeral cost was today. $10,000 came up, and that is accurate. Certainly it's accurate. But that's not the funeral home's complete charges. That is the complete charges typically with the entire funeral. So you'll have the funeral home charges of the professional service fees, the casket, the vault, those items. But they decided years ago that why should you, on the worst day of your life, have to run out to the cemetery and pay for the grave opening and closing? Why should you have to go pay for the flowers? Why should you have to, go do all these different things that take place? And those things are obituary notices. Obituary notices used to be free, and today I think we had the craziest crowd when I mentioned this because everybody knew how expensive obituaries have gotten to. $200-300 around here. And they thought that was crazy. What I shared with them was, don't put it in the Philadelphia, the Pittsburgh, the DC papers, any major metropolitan papers, because you're going to be in the thousands of dollars there. Yeah, it is. That would go onto the total funeral bill, but it's not a funeral home charge. So what I always like to point out to everyone is that while you're going to see an overall bill at any funeral home you go to, a lot of those charges don't belong to the funeral home. So it's, but it is a total funeral cost, so it's still roughly 1/4 of one's income. And I always like to think that if that group of people back in the early 1900s thought that it was such a good idea to take care of the arrangements, help each other take care of the arrangements, it's really a good idea today as well. Nothing's changed. So our funeral home plan is that program. For those people who choose to go into it, you don't have to worry about it. My oldest brother's 10 years older than I. He had a massive stroke a number of years ago. Pretty well recovered, but he cannot get an insurance policy. He didn't have one before. He can't get one now. So he actually called me up, and they took care of two things at once. They took care of their funeral arrangements, and they got a life insurance policy through the funeral home to take care of that. They locked their prices in at that particular time. They made payments on it because that's what was affordable to them. They took out a 10-year payment plan. Once they reached the 24th payment, anytime after that, if death would occur, the full funeral bill is paid for. He's still in that 24 to 120 month range. So you didn't hear it? Okay. My oldest brother took out the prearrangement. He's making 10 years worth of payments, 120 payments on that to pay it off. He's already gotten to the 24th month, and because he had to answer yes to health questions, that funeral bill would be paid for right now. If something happens, no one owes the difference. Now, for the items that the funeral home doesn't offer themselves, like if they wanted an obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer, the funeral home's not responsible for that. The family would be. So that's a little bit, that's where the difference is there. On a 3-year plan, for example, a 3-year plan, you only have to make 12 payments prior to the full amount being paid for. So the 5, 7, and the 10-year, you have to make 24 payments before it's fully paid. There are increments in those time periods that will pay. So like on the 12-month plan, by the 6th month, you're getting, I think it's 70%, I think is what you're getting, and then by the 12th, you're getting 100%. So that's stuff that Sharon can discuss with you. it just affords a family that doesn't want something bottom line basic, lowest cost, a way to do maybe a little bit more. For my father, what we did was we did the professional service charges at the funeral home. We did that first. We set it up on a 5-year plan. Once we got that paid off, then we did the casket and the vault. So we did it in steps. We can make this however you need it to be. If someone comes into Sharon and says, I can't afford more than $50 a month, she can get something started. And it's all age dependent. Everyone, it's guaranteed issue. It does not matter what your health condition is, we can get it for you. The younger you are, the less expensive it's going to be, and the more you're going to save over time, because that was the kind of the joke with my brother at the end of the program, and I was waiting for it. At the end of the evening when we got his prearrangements done, he's like, well, I thought you'd give me a discount. I said, I did. I did give you a discount because they chose cremation. I said, there's a 2-part discount there. Number one, today is the day to do cremation prearrangements. Mark my words, cremation costs are going to go through the roof. We're already starting to see it in certain communities where they can't keep the doors opened on them for $750. They can't do it. It just isn't possible. It doesn't sound like a lot, but last year we lost over 500 funeral homes nationwide, and I would say a lot of them are due to the fact that they just couldn't keep the doors open anymore. They need, with insurance costs and every other operation cost, they need a higher amount. So I told him, I'm like, you saved a bunch. By getting it today, you're not going to pay 10 years or hopefully 20 years prices down the road. You got that? Mm-hmm.
Does all funeral homes offer something like this?
Thank you very much. This program, I don't know why it works this way, but that's where I'm going right to next. No, not all funeral homes do offer this program. Some will offer something similar, some offer nothing even remotely close. For the longest time, funeral homes only offered a trust-based product. And for the longest time, that was fine. But a number of years ago, the state Supreme Court came along and said, that is an option. You can put the money into this trust. But that trust, in most cases, belongs to the funeral home owner, not you. And I know of a select number of funeral homes that have exercised their rights as the owner to that money. When death occurs, you will use that funeral home, no one else. And it doesn't matter what they say or do. If you don't like them, they've done crazy things, they've done illegal things, you're stuck. So you really have to be careful who you're working with, and you really want to make certain that that money is, not all trusts are bad. And there are certain cases where a trust is ideal, but you really got to be careful with that. Then for others, you will find that they will utilize an insurance-based product, but there are differences there too. What happens with those insurance-based products? My job with Geisels and all the other funeral homes I work with is, and in fact last week I was in Cincinnati, Ohio at one of the insurance companies. I go out there about 4 times a year. I look at all their financial records. They have to, by law, they have to provide quarterly reports to the federal government. I go and I look at that. I have them explain to me how financially safe they are, because this is your money. It's not Geisel's money. It's not my money. It's yours. My responsibility is to Geisel Funeral Home. They need to know that when your death occurs, there's going to be the money there to pay for it. So I review it pretty regularly. The way the products are designed and built is so deep that, that would take a private conversation. I'd be more than happy to ever, share it with people. But these insurance companies obviously are out to make money for themselves. And it's the ones that are willing to do it for a fair price that are the best. Because some of them, like on multi-pays, on the monthly pay, there is one company out there, let's just say that you went to Funeral Home ABC down the road and you wanted a $10,000 funeral. You wanted to pay on it over 10 years. There are companies out there that you will pay about $3,600 more than what you would, say, at Geisel Funeral Home. It's all in the cost of that insurance. The unfortunate part is that I don't know how you figure that out. I don't. I mean, other than if you go in and you ask the right questions, you'd want to see what is the cost of that insurance going to be. Kind of like a mortgage. You know, I haven't quite figured that out. I just trust my mortgage broker, and hopefully they're giving me the best deal, but because it's not all just about that rate. There's some other things there. So my words of caution are this. If Geisel's not your funeral home of choice, and when we come to these programs, while we're here representing Geisel, we're not even looking to sell you anything at this point. We just want to educate you. If you're going to go to a different funeral home, Sharon will gladly give you a list of questions to ask somebody else to find out what they are doing, because they just aren't all the same. For those people who have ever seen the ads on television or on radio, you know, for so many cents a day, you can take care of your final expenses. Yeah, maybe. But unfortunately, a lot of that, you're purchasing units of insurance, and a unit of insurance is typically going to be maybe $500 or $1,000. And somebody that buys 3 units at $500, they're not paying for much. We recognize, though, that there are people out there that have taken that route. And that's okay, because at least they started something. The best thing you can do, though, is let us know that that's what you've done so that we can kind of guide you. I had a situation up in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, where one of my funeral directors called me up, and he was all panicked. He said, "Why is our customer getting a bill? They paid their funeral. They wrote the check out, the full amount." I did a little bit of research, and I'm like, yeah, they paid it off. It was on that end. The woman went into the funeral home. She took care of the arrangements. She went home, and she just happened to be watching TV that night late, and she ended up buying all these units of insurance. So the funeral director basically went to her and explained, you know, I would stop those payments right now because you're really not buying anything and you don't need it. We caught it in ahead of time, really, and yet it was behind. She didn't go out that much. So my words of caution are just know what you're getting yourself into. I hate to say that, but that's why the funeral homes I work with up and down the East Coast are, I believe, the best in the profession. We have an agreement. When we come to do this program, there will not be a sales gimmick involved with it. We're not doing it. And if we are, I quit. I'm going to the next funeral home, because there are funeral homes out there that will want to do this. And with that being said, that kind of leads to, I have 2 requests of you. Those requests are, number 1, if you found this information at all helpful, tell someone. Invite them to one of our Lunch and Learn programs. We will be more than glad and happy to come back and do this again. So that's one request I have. The other request is we do put a contact information sheet in the packages. If you'll fill that out to the best of your willingness. Sharon does not call anyone that does not want to be called, because that would be a sales thing. We like to have a record of maybe who we along the way had talked to. Usually we can, a lot of times with the restaurant programs that we do, they're smaller and we can a lot of times recognize the people that have come to them. But in the larger groups, we can't always do that. But if we have an idea of where you were at when we talked to you, it just kind of makes it feel a little bit better. Plus, we're able to gauge how well the program ran and all. But those are my 2 requests. I know you want to talk a little bit about the book here, and then I'll come back to the program. Okay.
Okay. My only thing that I want to point out is the book. It's a book that Geisel Funeral Home, and we are the only funeral home in Chambersburg that has put it together. We put it together last year mainly because of the number of people that we've been touching with prearrangements. This book is full circle. It goes from prearranging all the way through bereavement and grief. Grief is its own animal all in itself, and if anybody has had a death close to themselves, you understand what I'm talking about. But the beginning of the book talks about Geisel Funeral Home. It talks about how long we've been around. It talks about the staff that we have on hand. Some of them have been there 25 and 30 years. I had worked at Park Lawn Memorial Gardens for 7.5 years before I went to Geisel's. So, and I've born and raised in this town. My kids have grown up in this town. It's home to me. When I talk about this funeral home, it's very dear to my heart, only because I've worked with numerous funeral homes, having worked at the cemetery. And when Mr. Geisel came to me and asked me to join the team, I didn't have to bat an eye. I knew that's where I wanted to be. I feel that God has led me to do what I do, and I'm not saying that because I'm in a church, but when I was 18 years old, I walked in the house and my parents were sitting with a man in a suit, and pictures of caskets all over the dining room table, and I said, "What are you doing?" My dad said, "We're making our final arrangements." I said, "Who's dying?" He said, "Nobody. My attorney told me I need to have my affairs in order." I was 18 years old. It was the last thing I wanted to hear. I wanted to get married. I wanted my dad to walk me down the aisle, and I wanted to have grandchildren for them one day. And that happened. They didn't die until 2007. It was 1983 when they made their plans. Like Kent talked about, they planned for cremation. They paid $485 for cremation. It's not what you pay today. And in 2007, when they died, I didn't pay another dime. Almost 30 years later, and I didn't pay another dime. In 2003, my brother, at the age of 39, dropped dead of a massive heart attack. And I saw what it did to my parents. And that's why I do what I do today. If somebody would have told me 20 years ago, you're going to work at a funeral home and you're going to help families, I'd have said, "You're crazy." Not what I wanted to do. I've been in management all my life. But I found my niche, and this is what I do. So with the book, we talked about the 125 things. In the center of the book is a place for you to fill out your 125 things. Each one of you should have your own book because there's a place for each one of you. And your choices might be different from your spouse's choices. But the important piece to this is make sure you put it in a place that somebody can find it when something happens. I hope you come see me at Geisel's, and I hope that we can sit down and talk about your plans. And if you don't, use this book. Do it for your family. Do it for your loved ones, because the day's going to come when somebody's got to walk through the funeral home doors. It's going to be the worst day of their life, and they're not going to have the answers. You have that choice to give them the answers. And if you don't do it, nobody has it. There's nothing worse than looking at a family who, number one, has no money to pay for it, and they have to choose cremation when they knew that it wasn't what their mom wanted or what their dad wanted. But we see it every day. We had a family this week. The wife had come in. She had taken care of her arrangements. She didn't pay for them. She told her daughter. She didn't tell her husband anything. He knew nothing about her life insurance policy. He knew nothing about anything. We sat and we met with them yesterday, and today we've not heard back from them. We have no idea what's going to happen. We planned everything for Friday, and it's not going to happen Friday. When people don't have the answers and they're grief-stricken, grief takes over. Put the answers down for somebody. And I can't thank you all enough for being here tonight. That's what I told Pastor Joe. I said, I'm passionate. He said, it doesn't show. I'm extremely passionate about what I do. So just write it down. Get your information written down. And if you need help, my business card's attached to the book. It costs nothing to come see me. I show off the funeral home. If you don't want to go in the showroom, we don't have to go in the showroom. People say, I don't want to see caskets. Okay, I've got a book. I had a lady last week, and she said, all right, fine, let's go in the showroom. But she told me, she said, close the door. I don't want to go in there. And it was her that wanted to go in then. We talked about it, and we went in, and she chose what she wanted then. It's your choice. It's not anybody else's choices. And like Kent, mine's taken care of. My parents died 3 months apart. I wasn't done grieving my mother when my father passed. And it's just my sister and I now, and so we both have ours all taken care of. It's the best gift you can give your loved ones. Thank you all.
And before we wrap it up, anybody have any questions that we didn't answer? And for those who want to ask questions in private, we're certainly here after too. But I just wanted to make sure that there weren't any other questions. And if not, as Sharon said, thank you very much for allowing us to come out and talk. Okay. Good deal. I think we're good. So, thank you.